Rain hadn't let up for 3 days straight, hammering the diner's tin awning like it had a personal grudge. Mia Coop had just finished wiping down the same counter she'd been wiping for 6 years when the door swung open with a force that made the bell crack against the glass. He walked in impossibly dry. No umbrella. No raincoat. Not a single drop clinging to the shoulders of that charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. Behind him, 2 men built like filing cabinets flanked the entrance, water pooling at their feet, but he remained untouched, as if the storm itself knew better than to inconvenience him. The Tuesday lunch crowd went silent. Forks paused midair. Even the hiss of the griddle seemed to hold its breath. Mia's hand tightened on the coffee pot as the man's eyes swept the room with surgical precision, cataloging exits, counting heads, assessing threats in the span of a heartbeat. Then those eyes, dark, cold, calculating, locked onto the corner booth. The one with the duct-taped vinyl. The one where old Sun Ho had sat every single morning for 4 years, trembling hands wrapped around burnt rye toast and oatmeal no one else would eat. The booth that had been empty for exactly 2 weeks. The man in the charcoal suit moved toward it like he owned the building. Which Mia would soon discover, he thought he did. She watched him slide into Sun Ho's seat with the kind of rigid control that came from a lifetime of never showing weakness. Up close, she could see it, the severe precision of his haircut, the sharp angles of his face, the way he sat with his spine exactly perpendicular to the table. Everything about him screamed boardroom and brutality in equal measure. Coffee. Black. His voice carried the faint musical lilt of soul wrapped in barbed wire. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady as she poured. 6 years of slinging hash had taught her to read dangerous men, and this one radiated the kind of danger that didn't need to announce itself. You knew my father. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed up as small talk. The coffee pot trembled. Just barely. Sun Ho was a good man. I'm sorry for your. Save it. He pulled a business card from his jacket, placed it on the table with the deliberate care of someone laying down a weapon. Young Ho. Chief Executive. A sole address she couldn't pronounce. My associate will be in touch. There are irregularities that need addressing. One of the filing cabinets stepped forward, dropping a manila envelope thick enough to be a phone book. It landed with a slap that made Mia flinch. What is this? Young Ho's expression never changed. That same cold indifference, like he was conducting a business merger instead of sitting in a diner that smelled of grease and broken dreams. Proof that you preyed on a lonely old man, exploited his diminishing faculties, manipulated him for financial gain. The words hit like a slap. The diner spun. Mia gripped the edge of the booth to steady herself, her brown skin flushing hot with anger and humiliation. That's not. Sun Ho was my friend. I never. My father, Young Ho interrupted, his voice dropping to something sharp enough to cut bone. Left you property. Buildings. Holdings worth considerably more than a waitress's conscience. He leaned forward, and for the first time, she saw something flicker behind those cold eyes. Something that looked almost like grief wearing a suit of rage. So you'll understand why I find your friendship highly suspect. The rain continued its assault on the awning. The Tuesday crowd pretended not to stare. And Mia Coop, in her red apron and practical bun, realized that the kind old man who'd tipped in crumpled singles and shared stories about sparrows had left her something far more complicated than inheritance. He'd left her a war. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you. Chapter 1. The lawyer arrived the next morning in a Mercedes that looked obscene parked outside a diner where the special was $2 eggs. His name was Pierce Whitmore, and everything about him, from his silver cufflinks to the way he pronounced Mia's last name with barely concealed disdain, made her want to throw hot coffee in his face. Instead, she slid into the booth across from him and Young Ho, her hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. Whitmore opened a briefcase that probably cost more than her car and pulled out documents that seemed to multiply like a magic trick. Bank statements, property deeds, Photographs of her and Sun Ho taken through the diner window, her refilling his coffee, steadying his hand, laughing at something he'd said. "Miss Co-op." Whitmore's voice was all smooth condescension. "These documents paint a rather disturbing picture of systematic elder exploitation. A vulnerable man with documented cognitive decline, isolated from his family, befriended by a woman of considerably lower socioeconomic status who stood to gain substantially from his generosity." Mia's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. Sun Ho had Parkinson's, not dementia. His mind was sharp as a knife until the day he died. Parkinson's disease, Whitmore continued as if she hadn't spoken, flipping to a medical report, frequently includes cognitive impairment in its advanced stages, impaired judgment, susceptibility to manipulation. He slid a photograph across the table. Sun Ho's signature on a legal document, the letters shaky and barely legible. "Does this look like a man in full possession of his faculties?" Young Ho sat perfectly still beside his lawyer, but Mia could feel his gaze like a physical weight. She forced herself to meet those cold eyes. His hands shook. Not his mind. "There's a difference." "The courts may disagree," Whitmore said, gathering his papers with the satisfied air of a man who'd already won. "We're prepared to file suit for undue influence, fraud, and elder abuse. Unless, of course, you're willing to settle. Sign over the properties, walk away with a modest sum for your services, and we can all forget this unfortunate situation." The word services landed like a slur. Mia felt heat crawl up her neck. "I think we're done here," she said, standing abruptly. "Sit down." Young Ho's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made her knees buckle before her brain caught up. She sat. Hated herself for it, but sat. He leaned forward, hands folded on the table like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "You have 48 hours to respond to our offer. After that, we file. And Miss Coop." That cold gaze pinned her in place. "I always win." Chapter 2. Mia didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment above the laundromat that apparently now belonged to her, though she couldn't quite wrap her mind around that, and went through every memory of Sun Ho like evidence in a trial she hadn't known she'd be defending. The next morning, she called the number on Whitmore's card and told him she wanted to speak. Not negotiate. Speak. They met at the diner again. Same booth. Same cold-eyed Sun. But this time, Mia came prepared with her own evidence, for years of receipts, photographs, and memories that smelled like burnt rye toast and dish soap. She pulled out a composition notebook, its cover worn soft from handling, and opened it to the first page. Sun Ho's handwriting, shaky but legible, dated from 4 years ago. "He kept a journal," Mia said, sliding it across the table. "Every day. What he ate. What we talked about. How he felt. You want to know if he was in his right mind? Read it yourself." Young Ho picked up the notebook like it might explode. His eyes scanned the first entry, then the second, and something shifted in his face, just a hairline fracture in that marble facade. "Today the waitress girl asked about my tremor. I told her Parkinson's. She didn't flinch. Didn't pity. She just asked if I wanted extra napkins. I think I might come back tomorrow. He came in every morning at 7, Mia continued, her voice steady now, anchored by memory. Ordered the same thing. Oatmeal plain. Burnt rye toast. Coffee, 2 sugars. His hands shook so bad at first he couldn't hold the spoon, so I'd sit with him during the morning lull and we'd talk while he ate. About everything. About nothing. About Korea and sparrows and how America was too loud for old men." She pulled out more evidence, photographs she'd taken on her phone over the years. Sun Ho smiling at the counter. Sun Ho with the Tuesday regulars. Sun Ho helping her fix the jukebox that never worked right. When his tremors got worse, I'd cut his toast for him. He was embarrassed at first, but I told him my grandfather had Parkinson's too. That it was just hands being difficult, not a man being less. Mia's voice cracked just slightly. He wasn't prey. He was my friend. Whitmore started to speak, but Young Ho raised a hand. The lawyer went silent immediately. "You nursed him," Young Ho said flatly. Not a question. An accusation that somehow hurt worse than the original charge. I was kind to him. There's a difference. And he paid you for this kindness. He tipped. Like everyone tips. Sometimes more when I wouldn't let him struggle alone with his breakfast. Mia leaned forward, anger finally overriding fear. Your father was lonely. You want to know why? Because in 4 years you never came. Not once. I watched him sit in that booth and stare at the door every single morning like he was waiting for someone who never showed up. So yeah, I was there. I listened. I cared. And if that makes me a predator in your eyes, then I guess you don't know much about kindness. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Young-Ho's jaw tightened, his knuckles white where his hands gripped the journal. He never called, Young-Ho said finally, and for the first time, there was something raw in his voice. Something almost human. In 15 years. He never called. He couldn't. Mia pulled out one final piece of evidence, a letter, folded and refolded so many times the creases were nearly worn through. He wrote you letters. Dozens of them. Never sent them. I found them in his apartment after. She couldn't finish that sentence. He wanted to call. He was just afraid you wouldn't answer. Chapter 3. The reading of the will happened 3 days later in a lawyer's office that smelled like old books and expensive cologne. Mia sat in a chair that was too big for her, feeling like an imposter, while Young-Ho occupied the space beside her with the kind of presence that made the room seem smaller. The estate lawyer, a woman named Janet Reeves with kind eyes and no-nonsense glasses, opened a folder and began to read in a voice that turned legal jargon into poetry. To my son Young-Ho, I leave my love and my regret in equal measure. I know you will not understand the choices I made. Perhaps one day you will forgive them. Young-Ho's expression didn't change, but Mia saw his hand tighten on the armrest. To Mia Coop, who showed an old man more kindness than he deserved, I leave the following properties and holdings. The building currently housing Marge's Diner at 847 Lafayette Street, the adjacent laundromat at 849 Lafayette Street, and the corner store at 851 Lafayette Street, along with all associated business licenses, equipment, and remaining inventory. Additionally, I leave her the contents of my apartment at 1240 Grove Street, Unit 4B, to do with as she sees fit. The room tilted. Mia gripped the edge of her chair. I'm sorry, what? Reeves looked up with a small, sad smile. You own the building, Miss Co-op. All 3 units. As of 2 weeks ago, when Mr. Sun-Ho Park passed, they became yours. That's, Mia couldn't form words. Couldn't process the fact that she'd just gone from barely making rent to owning the place she'd worked for 6 years. That's not possible. It's very possible, Reeves said gently, and legally ironclad. Mr. Park was meticulous in his documentation. He had full mental capacity according to 3 separate psychiatric evaluations conducted over the last year. He was explicit in his wishes and his reasoning. She pulled out another document, this one handwritten in Sun-Ho's trembling script. He left this letter to explain his decision. Would you like me to read it? Mia couldn't speak. She just nodded. Reeves adjusted her glasses and began to read. Mia, you will think this is too much. You will try to refuse. Don't. An old man does not have many chances to repay kindness in this world, and you gave me 4 years of mornings that didn't taste like loneliness. You made me feel human again when I had forgotten what that meant. The buildings are not charity. They are investment in someone who knows what it means to work with dignity. Make them into something good. Make them into something that would make your grandfather proud. To my son, if you are reading this, know that I am sorry. For leaving. For the silence. For loving you in a way that looked like abandonment. I hope Mia will tell you stories about the old man in the corner booth. Maybe in those stories, you will find a father you can forgive. The letter ended there. Reeves set it down carefully. Young-Ho stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a wound opening. For a moment, Mia thought he might flip the table, might unleash whatever violence was coiled beneath that expensive suit. Instead, he walked to the window and stood with his back to the room, his shoulders rigid with the kind of control that came from a lifetime of not being allowed to break. "This is unacceptable," Whitmore said, flipping through documents with increasing desperation. "The evaluations could have been falsified. The will itself could be." "The will is legitimate," Reeves interrupted, her voice cool. "I supervised its creation personally. If you'd like to contest it, Mr. Whitmore, you're welcome to try. But I should warn you that Mr. Park anticipated that possibility and left a rather comprehensive paper trail specifically to prevent any challenges." She pulled out yet another folder, this one thick enough to be a manuscript, and set it on the table with a decisive thump. Bank statements showing no unusual transfers. Medical records showing full cognitive capacity. Recorded conversations between Mr. Park and myself discussing his wishes. Testimony from 3 witnesses, including myself, attesting to his state of mind. And a video recording of him explaining his decision in his own words. Reeves looked at Whitmore over her glasses. "Would you like me to play the video?" Whitmore's jaw worked silently. He looked at Young Ho, but his client was still facing the window, still radiating that terrible control. "No," Young Ho said finally, his voice flat. "That won't be necessary." He turned, and Mia was struck by how tired he looked. Not physically, but somewhere deeper, like his bones were exhausted from carrying too much weight for too long. "Miss Co-op." He inclined his head with the barest hint of respect. "It seems you've won." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the ruins of something she didn't fully understand, holding pieces of a puzzle that would never quite fit together. Chapter 4. Young Ho didn't come back to the diner for a week. Mia told herself she was relieved. Told herself it was better this way. Let him disappear back to Seoul, or wherever men like him went when they weren't terrorizing waitresses with lawyers and cold accusations. But on Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the will reading, the bell above the door chimed, and there he was. Alone this time. No lawyer. No muscle. Just a man in a slightly less expensive suit, looking oddly out of place without his entourage of intimidation. He walked to the corner booth, his father's booth, and sat down with the kind of careful deliberation that made Mia think of someone defusing a bomb. She approached with the coffee pot, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. "Coffee." "Black," he said, but quieter this time, almost like a request instead of a command. She poured in silence, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the anger or the accusations or whatever weapon he'd brought this time. Instead, he said, "Oatmeal. Plain. And burnt rye toast." Mia's hand jerked, sloshing coffee onto the saucer. "That's what my father ordered." "Yes." Young Ho looked up at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were just hollow. "I'd like to try it." She brought him the order 10 minutes later. The same bland breakfast that Sun Ho had eaten every single day for 4 years. Watched Young Ho pick up the spoon with steady hands that had never had to fight a tremor, never had to accept help from a stranger to do something as simple as eat. He took a bite, made a face. "It's terrible," he said flatly. "Yeah," Mia agreed, sliding into the seat across from him without being invited. Somehow, it felt like the right thing to do. Your father said it reminded him of home. Something about his mother making it when he was sick. Young Ho took another bite, then another, working through the bowl with the grim determination of a man completing a penance. "Tell me about him," he said finally, setting down the spoon. "The man who sat here. Not my father. The man you knew." So Mia told him. About the way Sun Ho would hum old Korean songs under his breath while he ate. About how he'd leave dollar bills folded into origami cranes as tips, even though his hands shook so badly it took him 20 minutes to make each one. About the time he'd stayed late to help her fix the jukebox, and how he'd told her stories about Seoul before it became all steel and skylines, when it was still a city that remembered how to be gentle. Young Ho listened in silence, his untouched toast growing colder on the plate. When she finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small and worn, a photograph, edges soft from handling. "He carried this," Young Ho said, sliding it across the table. It was in his wallet when he died. The hospital sent me his belongings. Mia picked up the photograph. It showed a young Sun-ho, maybe in his 30s, before time and Parkinson's had bent him into something fragile, with his arm around a small boy who had young Ho's exact eyes. They were standing in front of a street market, both of them smiling at something beyond the camera's frame. "You look happy," Mia said softly. "We were." Young Ho took the photograph back with careful reverence. Before everything went wrong. Chapter 5. 2 days later, Young Ho showed up at the diner just as Mia was closing. He was in his Mercedes, engine idling, looking like he was reconsidering whatever impulse had brought him here. She knocked on the window. He startled, actually startled, which was oddly humanizing, and rolled it down. "The apartment," he said without preamble. "My father's apartment. I need to see it. And I think—" He stopped, jaw working like the words were too heavy to push out. "I think I need you there." They drove in silence through the city as dusk turned it into something softer, the streetlights turning on one by one like stars coming out in reverse. The apartment was in a neighborhood that Mia had never had reason to visit. Not quite upscale, not quite rundown, just existing in that middle space where people went to disappear. Unit 4B was on the 4th floor of a building with an elevator that wheezed like it had emphysema. Young Ho unlocked the door with a key that looked too small in his hands, and they stepped into a time capsule of careful living. The studio was tiny, barely bigger than Mia's storage closet at the diner. A narrow bed pushed against one wall. A kitchenette with 2 burners and a mini fridge. A single armchair facing a window that looked out onto a brick wall. Everything was neat, almost compulsively so, except for the far corner where dozens of envelopes were stacked in careful piles. The unsent letters. Young Ho walked to the center of the room and just stood there, rotating slowly like he was trying to reconcile this sparse, lonely space with the father he thought he'd known. His marble facade was cracking now, visible fissures spreading across his composure. "He lived here," Young Ho said, and his voice was wrong, cracking at the edges. "For 15 years. In this box. While I was—" he couldn't finish. Mia wanted to fill the silence, but didn't know how. Instead, she moved to the kitchenette, opening cabinets. Instant oatmeal packets. White bread. Coffee, the cheap kind in the big tin. Everything simple. Everything designed for a man whose hands shook too badly for complicated cooking. He was happy here, Mia said finally. Or at least he found peace. He told me once that small spaces felt safer. That he could keep track of everything, make sure nothing was out of place. Young Ho's shoulders hitched once, violently, like something was trying to break out of his chest. He pressed a hand to his mouth, and Mia realized with a sharp jolt that he was crying, or trying desperately not to. "I thought he'd left because he didn't love me," Young Ho said, the words muffled behind his hand. "Because I'd disappointed him. Become something he couldn't stand to look at. So I became more of that thing. More ruthless. More powerful. More everything he'd supposedly run from. And now you're telling me he was here, eating trash oatmeal, and living in a room smaller than my closet, and he was happy." The last word came out like an accusation. Mia crossed the room and did something probably incredibly stupid. She put her hand on Young Ho's arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "He wasn't running from you," she said quietly. "He was running to you. Or trying to. He just didn't know how to make it the last few steps." Young Ho turned to look at her, and his eyes were red-rimmed, that cold control completely shattered. "How do you live with that? Knowing someone loved you, and you never knew until it was too late." Mia thought about her grandfather, about all the things she'd never said before the Parkinsons took his words, and then his breath. You don't live with it. You just live. And you try to do better with the people who are still here. Chapter 6. They spent the next hour going through the apartment together, careful as archaeologists excavating something precious and fragile. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Old man clothes, more instant oatmeal, books in Korean that Mia couldn't read but Young Ho could, his fingers tracing the worn spines like he was reading Braille. Then Young Ho opened the drawer of the bedside table and went completely still. What is it? Mia moved closer. He pulled out a photograph, this one in a cheap frame that had been handled so much the finish was worn down to bare metal in places. It showed a teenage young Ho in a school uniform, grinning at the camera with the kind of cocky confidence that came from not yet understanding how badly the world could hurt you. I remember this, young Ho said, his voice distant. First day of high school. He took 50 pictures because I kept blinking. I thought he was being annoying. He turned the frame over. On the back, in Sun Ho's shaking handwriting, were the words, "My son. My pride. My greatest failure." He kept it by his bed, Mia said unnecessarily, because what else was there to say? Young Ho set the photograph down carefully and kept searching, pulling out more evidence of a father's hidden love. A newspaper clipping about Young Ho's company from 3 years ago. A birthday card, never sent, dated from last year. A receipt from a private investigator, dated from 6 months ago, with notes in the margin, confirmed safe. Living well. Do not approach. He was watching me, Young Ho said, and it came out somewhere between awe and anguish. All these years, he was watching. The final item in the drawer was a sealed envelope with Young Ho's name on it in Sun Ho's careful script. Young Ho stared at it for a long moment before opening it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a much older photograph, one that had been folded and refolded so many times it was nearly falling apart at the creases. The photograph showed a young Sun Ho holding a baby, both of them in a hospital room. Sun Ho was looking down at the infant with an expression of such pure, unguarded love that it made Mia's chest ache. Young Ho's hand holding the photograph was trembling now, the first tremor she'd seen from him, though this one had nothing to do with Parkinson's. The letter was short. Young Ho, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and I never found the courage to bridge the distance I created between us. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things. You were 3 days old in this picture. I had been awake for 48 hours, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Your mother took the photo and told me I looked like a man who'd just discovered the meaning of life. She was right. You were everything. You are everything. I left Seoul because the life I'd built there, the power, the connections, the family business, was going to destroy you. You were already being groomed, already being shaped into something I never wanted for you. So I ran. I thought if I disappeared, they'd leave you alone, let you become something clean. I was wrong. You became what you are not because of me, but because I abandoned you to it. That is a guilt I will carry to whatever comes after this. The woman who has this letter, Mia, showed me that kindness still exists in the world. She reminds me of your mother, stubborn and gentle in equal measure. Trust her. She will tell you who I was in these last years. Maybe in that stranger, you can find something to forgive. Be better than I was. Be better than I taught you to be. My son, I love you. I never stopped. Young Ho read it twice, then folded it carefully and pressed it to his forehead like a prayer or a penance. When he finally looked up, tears were streaming down his face openly now, no more attempts at control. He loved me, he said, like the words were a revelation and a wound simultaneously. He left to save me, and I became exactly what he was trying to prevent. I became a monster because I thought that's what he wanted. You're not a monster, Mia said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. You don't know what I've done. Young Ho laughed, bitter and broken. The things I've built my empire on. The people I've hurt. I thought I was making him proud, becoming powerful enough that he'd have to acknowledge me. And he was here, eating dollar oatmeal and living like a monk, trying to be small enough that I'd never find him because he thought I was better off without him. Chapter 7. They were still sitting there, surrounded by the archaeology of Sun Ho's hidden life, when Young Ho's phone rang. Not his regular phone, a second one, pulled from an inner jacket pocket that Mia hadn't known existed. The sound was harsh, discordant, wrong in the quiet space. Young Ho looked at the screen, and every trace of vulnerability vanished, replaced by something cold and deadly that made the air in the apartment change density. I have to take this, he said, standing abruptly. Wait here. But the apartment was small, and Mia heard everything. Young-ho answered in Korean, his voice dropping into registers she didn't know existed, each word sounding like a blade being sharpened. She didn't understand the language, but she understood the tone, the kind of authority that brooked no argument, backed by the implicit threat of violence. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. When Young-ho returned, he was checking a different phone, his fingers flying across the screen with the efficiency of someone coordinating something. Something that made Mia's survival instincts scream. "We need to leave," he said curtly. "Now. What's going on?" "Nothing that concerns you." But his eyes were scanning the apartment, the windows, calculating angles and threats in a way that very much suggested it concerned her a great deal. "Young-ho, there are people who don't appreciate my absence from Seoul," he said, moving to the window and looking down at the street below. His jaw tightened. "And some who see my presence here as an opportunity to settle old grudges. I shouldn't have brought you here. That was sloppy, sentimental, dangerous." Mia joined him at the window. For stories down, a black SUV had pulled up in front of the building. 2 men were getting out, both wearing jackets too heavy for the weather. "Friends of yours?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The opposite." Young-ho pulled her away from the window with surprising gentleness. "How do you feel about fire escapes?" "I feel like this is maybe not the time for abstract philosophical discussions about my feelings." Despite everything, Young-ho's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "Fair." They moved fast. Young-ho grabbed the photograph of baby him and his father's letter, stuffing them in his jacket, then led Mia to the window on the opposite side of the apartment. The fire escape was rusted and looked like it predated basic building codes, but it beat whatever was about to come through that door. They just cleared the window when Mia heard the apartment door splinter inward. Young-ho moved down the fire escape with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this before, his hand steadying Mia when her foot slipped on the wet metal. They dropped into an alley that smelled like garbage and broken dreams, and Young-ho immediately pulled out a phone, the regular one this time, and made a call. 2 minutes, he said into the phone. Then to Mia. "Can you run in those shoes?" She was wearing her waitressing sneakers, practical, worn, designed for spending 12 hours on her feet. "Yeah, then run." They ran. Through alleys and side streets, Young-ho navigating with the certainty of someone who'd memorized maps and exit strategies as a survival skill. Behind them, Mia could hear shouting, the sound of pursuit, and once, distinctly, a car door slamming. They burst onto a main street just as a different Mercedes pulled up, this one driven by one of the filing cabinets from the diner. Young-ho shoved Mia into the back seat and slid in beside her, barking instructions in Korean. The car peeled away from the curb with the kind of acceleration that pressed Mia back into the leather seats. "What the hell was that?" she demanded when her heart rate dropped below cardiac arrest levels. "Old business," Young-ho said, checking his phone again. His voice was back to that flat, controlled tone, but Mia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never stopped moving, tracking threats. "A rival organization that thinks my father's death makes me vulnerable. They're not wrong. Are they going to come after me?" Young-ho looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "Not if I make it clear you're under my protection." "And how do you make that clear?" His smile was all edges. "Very, very publicly. And very, very violently." The Mercedes drove them not back to the diner, but to a hotel downtown, the kind with a doorman and marble floors, and the sort of hushed luxury that made Mia acutely aware of her waitress uniform. Young-ho led her to a suite that was bigger than Sun-ho's apartment had been, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that looked like it cost more than her car. "You'll stay here tonight," he said, already moving to the window to check the street below. "I have to handle something. Don't leave. Don't answer the door unless it's me or someone with this code word." He told her a phrase in Korean that she made him repeat 3 times until she could approximate the pronunciation. "Young-ho," Mia said, and he turned. "What exactly do you do? Your father said you ran a company, but companies don't usually involve running from people through fire escapes." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved closer, and she could see the weight of whatever he was carrying in the lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders. "My father left Seoul to escape the life," he said quietly. "I walked right back into it. Built an empire on top of the foundation he'd tried to destroy. I tell myself it's legitimate business, real estate, shipping, entertainment. And on paper it is. But the foundation," he laughed without humor. "The foundation is blood and leverage and the kind of power that keeps prosecutors quiet and competitors buried. My father knew what I'd become. That's why he stayed away." Mia should have been terrified, should have run. Instead, she just felt sad, for Sun Ho, for this man carrying his father's mistakes and his own, for the little boy in that photograph who'd grown up into something that required fire escapes and code words. "Your father didn't stay away because of what you'd become," she said. "He stayed away because he thought you were safer without him. He was wrong." Young Ho moved to the door. "Stay here. I'll be back before morning. And if you're not—" He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Then take the photograph and the letter and forget you ever knew either of us." Then he was gone, and Mia was alone in a hotel suite that cost more per night than she made in a week, wondering how a simple act of kindness to a lonely old man had led her here. Chapter 8. Young Ho came back 3 hours later with blood on his knuckles and something haunted in his eyes. Mia was still awake, sitting on the couch watching the city lights and trying not to imagine all the ways the night could have gone wrong. He walked straight to the bathroom without speaking, and she heard water running for a long time. When he emerged, his hands were clean but the haunted look remained. "Are you okay?" Mia asked. "Define okay." He poured himself a drink from the suite's bar, expensive scotch that he knocked back like water. "The message has been sent. You're untouchable now. Anyone who comes near you answers to me, and after tonight, they know exactly what that means." Mia didn't ask what he'd done. Didn't want to know. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Young Ho poured another drink, but didn't drink it, just stared at the amber liquid like it held answers. "Because you were right. About all of it. My father didn't leave because of what I was. He left because of what I was going to become. Because the people who wanted to make me into their weapon, their successor, their next-generation monster, they would have used him to control me. So he removed himself from the equation." He finally looked at her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. "He fled to America with nothing. Changed his name. Lived like a ghost for 15 years. And I convinced myself, that it was because I'd disappointed him. That he couldn't stand to look at what I was becoming. So I leaned into it. Became exactly what those men wanted me to be. Worse even. I became the thing my father burned his entire life down to prevent." Mia moved to sit beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "He knew, though. He kept track of you. The private investigator, the newspaper clippings. He knew what you'd become, and he still kept your picture by his bed. Still wrote you letters he never sent. He still loved you. That makes it worse." Young Ho's voice cracked. "Don't you understand? He loved me enough to destroy his own life to try to save mine, and I spit on that sacrifice. I walked willingly into the shadow he died to pull me out of." "So walk back out," Mia said simply. Young Ho laughed, bitter and broken. "It's not that simple. You don't just leave. The life, it doesn't let go. The connections, the obligations, the things I've done, and the people who know I've done them. I'm in too deep. Have been for too long. Your father got out. My father had to fake his death and live in a box for 15 years. He had to give up everything, his name, his home, his son, just to escape. And even then, it found him in the end. Because I brought it right to his doorstep tonight." Mia turned to face him fully. "Then make it mean something. He gave up everything to try to save you. Don't let that be for nothing." Young Ho looked at her like she was speaking a language he'd forgotten how to understand. "How?" "I don't know. But you're sitting here with your father's last letter in your pocket, telling you to be better. So be better. Figure it out. You're supposed to be this powerful, terrifying mafia boss, right? Use that power for something that would make him proud." For a long moment, Young-ho just stared at her. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the distant possibility of it. He really liked you, Young-ho said finally. In the letters. He talked about you constantly. Called you the waitress girl with kind eyes. Said you reminded him of my mother. Tell me about her, Mia said softly. So Young-ho did. Told her about a woman who'd died when he was 12, who'd played the Gaegeum and made seaweed soup that tasted like home. Who'd held his father's hand through the early days of building the family business, back when they'd still believed they could keep it clean. Who'd made his father promise, on her deathbed, to get Young-ho out before the life consumed him the way it had consumed her. He tried, Young-ho said, his voice distant with memory. After she died, he tried so hard to pull away. To build something legitimate. But by then, I was already too interesting to the other families. The grandson of the old guard, son of a man who knew where all the bodies were buried. They started grooming me when I was 13. My father tried to stop it, but I thought, he stopped, jaw working. I thought he was trying to keep me weak. Keep me from my birthright. So I fought him. Pushed back. Aligned myself with the very people he was trying to protect me from. You were a kid, Mia said. You didn't know. I was old enough to know better. And when he finally left, when he disappeared and I thought he'd abandoned me, I doubled down. Made myself invaluable. Ruthless. Everything my mother had begged him to prevent. And now here I am, exactly where I was always going to end up, and the man who sacrificed everything to change that trajectory is dead. The weight of it sat heavy in the suite. All that guilt and regret and lost time pressing down like a physical thing. It's not too late, Mia said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Young-ho looked at her with something that might have been affection or might have been pity. You really think people like me get redemption arcs? I think your father did. He spent 15 years living as small as possible, trying to make up for whatever he'd done before. If he could do it, so can you. Young-ho was quiet for a long time, turning the glass in his hands. Finally, he said, the properties he left you. The buildings. They're worth about $3 million, conservatively. But they need work, new plumbing, electrical updates, proper renovations to meet current codes. That's another $1 million easy, to do it right. I don't have $1 million, Mia said, the reality of her inheritance finally settling in her chest like a stone. No. Young-ho set down the glass. But I do. And I think, he stopped, started again. I think my father would want those buildings to become something good. Something that serves the neighborhood the way he wished he'd served it. So I'll fund the renovations. Anonymous donation. No strings. Just, his voice caught. Just let it be something he'd be proud of. Mia felt tears prick her eyes. You do that. It's the least I can do. The very least. Young-ho stood, suddenly restless. I have to go back to Seoul. Handle the fallout from tonight. Make arrangements to extract myself from certain obligations. It'll take time. Maybe years. But I'm going to try. Try what? To be the son he deserved instead of the one he got. Chapter 9. Mia didn't see Young-ho for 2 weeks after that night. She returned to the diner and her apartment and her regular life, except now she was a property owner and the building she worked in was suddenly, impossibly, hers. The lawyer, Reeves, had helped her set up the paperwork, walking her through liens and taxes and business licenses with the patience of a saint. The laundromat next door was run by a Korean woman named Mrs. Kim, who'd known Sun-ho, and cried when Mia told her she was keeping all the current tenants at their existing rates. The corner store was operated by a Palestinian family who'd been there for 12 years and looked at Mia like she might be an angel or a con artist. They couldn't quite tell which. She was sitting in the diner after closing, going over renovation plans that she didn't fully understand, when the door opened despite the closed sign. Young-ho walked in looking like he'd gone 12 rounds with something mean. His face was unmarked, but there was a carefully controlled stiffness to his movements that suggested injuries hidden beneath the expensive suit. A bruise purpled along his jaw. His knuckles, when he set his hands on the counter, were scraped raw. You look terrible, Mia said. You should see the other guys. He tried to smile, but it came out wrong, pained. Can I get some coffee? And maybe some ice. She poured the coffee and filled a dish towel with ice from the machine, watching as he pressed it to his ribs with a barely suppressed wince. What happened? I made some people very angry, Young-ho said, taking a careful sip of coffee. Told them I was stepping back from certain operations. Divesting. They took it as a sign of weakness. Tried to make an example of me. His smile was all edges now. They failed. Young-ho. It's done. He reached into his jacket, slowly, painfully, and pulled out a folder. Renovation funds. 1.2 million. Should be enough to bring the buildings up to code, and then some. My lawyer will handle the transfer. It'll look like a community development grant. No connection to me. Mia took the folder with shaking hands. I can't accept this. You can and you will. It's not for you. It's for him. Young-ho's voice softened. My father lived in that neighborhood for 15 years. Made it his home. Let his legacy there be something good. Something that helps people instead of hurting them. What about you? What are you going to do? Young-ho finished his coffee and stood carefully, his hand bracing his ribs. I'm going home. To Seoul. There are things I need to dismantle. People I need to disappoint. It's going to take time, and it's going to be dangerous, but... He pulled out the photograph of his father holding baby him, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. I'm going to try to become the man in this picture instead of the one I've been. That's not going to be easy. No, he agreed. But nothing worth doing ever is. My father taught me that. Even if I didn't understand the lesson until it was too late. He moved toward the door, each step measured and careful. At the threshold, he turned back. Thank you, he said, for being kind to a lonely old man, for telling me stories that made him real instead of just a ghost I resented, for making his last years something other than isolation and regret. He loved you, Mia said, because it needed to be said one more time. Every single day. That love was in every unsent letter, every kept photograph. Every morning he sat in that booth hoping maybe today would be the day he'd find the courage to call you. He loved you. Young-ho's jaw tightened, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I know. I just wish I'd known it when he was alive to hear me say it back. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, and Mia was left standing in her diner, holding a folder full of money that represented a father's love and a son's attempt at redemption. Chapter 10. 6 months passed. The renovations began, new plumbing snaking through walls, electricians rewiring decades of fire hazards, contractors arguing in 3 different languages about load-bearing beams and building codes. Mrs. Kim cried again when Mia showed her the plans for the expanded laundromat. The Palestinian family offered to cook her dinner every week for a year when they saw the upgraded kitchen planned for the corner store. The diner got new booths, but Mia kept the corner one with the duct-taped vinyl. Some things were meant to stay exactly as they were. She didn't hear from Young-ho. Didn't expect to. Men like him didn't send postcards or make friendly phone calls. They disappeared into their dangerous worlds and either survived or didn't. And you only found out which when bodies turned up or didn't. So when the mailman handed her a postcard on a Tuesday morning in late spring, she almost didn't recognize the neat Korean script on the back. It took her 3 tries and Google Translate to work out the message. I found the sparrows. They're smaller here than I remember, but they still sing the same songs. My father was right. Some things are worth the cost of starting over. Thank you for showing me what those things are. White. The front of the postcard showed a street market in Seoul, all bright colors and bustling life. In the corner, barely visible, someone had drawn a tiny bird in careful ink strokes. Mia pinned the postcard to the corkboard behind the register, right next to the photograph of Sun Ho that she'd framed. The old man smiling at the camera, a cup of bad coffee in his trembling hands, looking exactly like someone who'd found peace in the small, quiet moments. The bell above the door chimed. The morning regulars filtered in. The coffee pot hissed and burbled. The griddle heated up with its familiar metallic scent. And Mia Coop, property owner and keeper of stories, poured coffee and made burnt rye toast, and thought about fathers and sons and the long, winding roads we take toward forgiveness. Somewhere across the ocean, a man she'd known for only a handful of days was trying to become someone his father could be proud of. And somewhere in the space between here and there, an old man who'd lived small and loved large was finally, maybe resting easy. The corner booth stayed empty that morning. But Mia knew somehow that it wouldn't stay that way forever. People like Young Ho, people trying to outrun their shadows and build something better from the wreckage, they always found their way back to places that felt like home. And when he did come back, she'd have coffee waiting. Black, with burnt rye toast and terrible oatmeal. Just the way his father liked it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never